Hi, I'm Mike Elliott and welcome to Factory Friday. It's obviously been a really unusual season. We've had both the coronavirus to deal with, and because of that we've also had this sort of rapid progression of races with back-to-back triple headers. And that's made life tough. It's made life tough at the race weekends for the race engineers and the mechanics that are away. They've had to go into a bubble, they've had to experience the regular testing every 2 or 3 days. I don't envy them having to have that rod stuck up their nose. But they've had to go through that and stay in that bubble to be able to work in the way they've been able to work. Back in the factory has been more like a normal company would work, probably more like you guys have seen at home, where what we're trying to do is to balance the need to operate as a company and develop the car with the needs to keep everybody safe and with the needs to try and stop this horrible virus spreading. We have a task force that looks at coronavirus, which is made up of a number of the management, and we look at the best ways of dealing with this. How many people can we have in the factory safely? What precautions do we need to take place? What do we need to do to stop the virus getting into the factory? And as the virus is changing and as the number of cases are changing, we have to constantly re-evaluate what we're doing. So you've had that side of the coronavirus, and then on top of that you've also got to deal with the triple headers, this sort of very fast rate at which the races are coming, which in some ways is brilliant, particularly when you're winning. It's brilliant to have them coming quick and fast, but in other ways it's a big challenge being able to prepare for each race properly, post-process the results from that race and take the maximum learning from them so that we can develop the car as quickly as we possibly can. So during a race weekend we obviously have a number of people that are working normal shifts, and on top of that we have people that are supporting the race weekend itself. We have what we call the RSR, so the race support room, and we have people in there supporting the activities at the track, and that's about 20 people. And what happens is that we need to be able to operate independently at the track in case we lose our link, but those are people that are supporting the operations that are there, things like aerodynamics, strategy, vehicle dynamics, tyre analysis, and all sorts of bits of analysis that support the team there. We also have a few people that are here ready to run the simulator if we need to run it with a driver. So if there's a particular problem we want to look at, we can ask the driver to run in the simulator and we can try things that we can suggest to the track. And as well as the work we've got going on here, there's also another team at Brixworth where the PU is developed. So there's probably another 10 to 15 people there supporting the trackside operation of their power units across all of the teams that they support. Yeah, it's been an interesting year with triple headers. I think you guys will have seen what happens at the race weekends because you'll follow those. In terms of what happens at the factory, it's a bit different. For most of the engineers, the weekends changes the way we work during the week. So we've got a preparation phase for the weekend. We'll then be following the sessions live during the weekend. And then after the weekend, there's things that we need to follow up and decide what other work we need to do as a result of that weekend. Among the guys that are manufacturing the car, it's different again for them. So we'll have components that we need to fix or service. We'll have components that we'll need to test as a result of the fact that they've done the amount of mileage we'll use them for on the car. So the amount of work that's in the factory is completely dependent on what upgrades we're bringing to the car, but also how much damage we've done to the car during that weekend. And you know, if we have a big crash like we've seen with some of our competitors, then that will create a huge amount of work in the factory. Formula One's slightly unusual in that R&D for us happens everywhere. We don't have a separate R&D department. R&D happens everywhere. We build prototype cars, so everybody is doing some sort of research and development. So as a consequence of that, there is no sort of crossover from R&D that goes into manufacture. Instead, what we do have is we have a timeline of how components go from initial concept to appearing on the car, and they vary from component to component. So something simple like a flick on a cake tin, for instance, that could be an idea that's dreamt up, tested in the tunnel within a few days, and maybe appearing on the car a week later, through to things that would affect the chassis, for instance, we'll only do once a year, so they take much longer. And so we have different timelines for different parts. We're very lucky in that our two drivers like very similar things from the car, so whatever we develop for one is generally like for the other. And that's a really good position to be in because it allows us to develop one car. I have worked in the past in a team where the drivers want different things, and it's normally to do with the way the balance of the car alters through the corner and how that they turn the car. So how much stability they have on entry, determining how much mid-corner understeer they have. In situations like that, it becomes a bit more difficult to develop the cars because we don't want to develop one car for one driver and one car for the other, because that means we're halving the amount of work we can put into each car. Ideally, we want to develop one car and use all of our resources to develop that car and minimise the amount of work it takes to do different things for different cars. So generally what happens is if you've got drivers that want different things, most of that is isolated to the way the race engineers then set that car up for them to use it. So in general, what we try to do is to make the best use of the resources we've got when we're developing a Formula One car. So in terms of the parts you see on the car in a race weekend, we'll try and run those as long as we possibly can until we've got a new and better part we can replace them with. However, it's only true to say that the car is going to take quite a bit of damage. Just going round a track at the speeds it goes round, having stones flicked at the carbon parts creates damage. If we run wide somewhere and we go into the gravel, or if we have contact with another car, we do damage to those parts and those parts need replacing. We also have other bits of the car that only have certain lives. So some of the key structural bits will only run for a certain amount of kilometres because we want to make sure that they fit within the safety limits of those parts. So they will all come back to the factory, they'll be tested. They might even be rechecked and proofed structurally to make sure they're okay to go back to the track. But in general, any resource we're putting into replacing parts on the car is a resource we're not putting into developing new parts that make us go faster or make us more reliable and therefore bring us more performance. The majority of the communications that are seen in the garage are actually done over an intercom system. So that travels over IP, so like a computer would. And the only real radio we're using is backward and forwards to the car. And that system makes use of boxes that are provided by Formula One. So there's a standard communication system. And that standard communication system gives us both the radio backwards and forwards to the driver, but it also gives us all the telemetry, it gives the video feeds you see off the car. So that bit is the only radio system there isn't, and it's standard for all the teams. We have had to use the backup radio. Occasionally things go wrong and we fall back on that. And we've even had occasions where we've lost both radio systems, and if that happens, we revert back to the old school system on the pit wall. We have a pit board that the drivers can see as they pass, so they know that if they've got no radio communication, they know to look for their instructions on that. We first learnt of the 21 regulations being moved back to 22, so the new set of regulations that were coming in after Melbourne, so after the race that didn't take place because of coronavirus. The majority of us by then were actually working at home because of the lockdown that was imposed in the UK. The only time we'd actually seen the car run was at Barcelona, and in winter testing you don't really know where you are in terms of performance. At that stage of the season, we were still really focused on the upgrades that were to come to try and make sure that we were putting our effort into the season that was in hand, the 2020 season, the one that's there for us to win, the one that was most important to us at the time is the one that we're in. And as a consequence, there were only a small number of people that are actually working on the 21 project. And it was fairly easy for them to put that work down, park it ready for picking up again when we start the 22 development. In a series we did earlier in the year called Simple Science, one of the questions I was asked at the time was whether a car could travel upside down. Would it have enough downforce to do that? And I think the answer I gave at the time was yes it would, but you'd be mad to do it and there'd be various bits of the car that wouldn't work. In terms of what those bits are, then I think the car we develop is designed to deal with high G. It's designed to deal with high G laterally, so side to side, but also longitudinally, so fore and aft. But we still rely on gravity to deal with some of the fluids and to get the fluids in the right places that we can pick them up. So that's things like the fuel system. We expect the fuel to be at the bottom of the tank at certain points around the lap so we can pick it up. The same is true of the oil systems for the PU and for the gearbox. We need to be able to collect those fluids that we've used to cool the moving parts in the car and pick them up and use them again. And while we could run for a period of time upside down because we designed the car so it'll run at high G, you wouldn't want to do that for a sustained period. And you certainly wouldn't want to risk being upside down at the point where you had problems as a result of it. Formula One is just full of challenges. That's why we as engineers really love what we do. And we're constantly trying to develop new ways of doing things and new ways of improving what we've got. When we get things like a rule change, it doesn't really have a huge effect on what we're doing. We're still trying to develop new ways of finding lap time. And what we would do if we get a rule change is to look at those rules and say, what is that going to stop us from doing, and how can we get back the performance we've lost in different ways? And also, within those new rules, what new opportunities are opened up? What new opportunities are there for finding performance that we can make use of? So in some ways, the challenge of a new set of regulations is not that different to a challenge of an existing set of regulations. It's just the opportunities have changed in them. Thank you very much for all of your questions. It's always really interesting to hear what you've got to ask, and we really look forward to hearing your next set of questions.